Welcome to Ethics Matter. I'm Magali Laguerre-Wilkinson, and joining us today is Miranda Massey, a lawyer turned environmentalist who's now the founder of the Climate Museum. Hello, Miranda. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's lovely to be here.
Well, so I have to tell you, that is quite a leap going from lawyer. I mean, we know you're interested in the environment, in climate change, but not everyone wants to go and open a museum. How'd that happen?
Well, I was working at a wonderful nonprofit organization here in New York City that does environmental and civil rights activist litigation and advocacy. And I loved my work and I loved my colleagues. I was legal director there, but we weren't really focused on climate. And as I started to learn more and more about climate change, I came to feel it was both the determining civil rights and equality question for us as a civilization and a community, and also that it was a kind of overriding threat to human well-being at the same time, obliterating, those social distinctions. So when Hurricane Sandy hit New York,
which was the catalyst for you.
It was the catalyst for me. I had been having all these worried thoughts to the effect of, why am I not working more on climate? Hurricane Sandy came, and it was perfectly clear to me in that moment that I had to dedicate myself to climate, period. And the second thing that came into my head, unbeckoned and as if from an outside source, was a climate museum. I assumed one was already underway. I actually figured I had probably read about it and just forgotten, and was astounded to learn that this isn't something that we already have. It seems so necessary to me.
Now, when we say museum, we're thinking of a physical place, that
Yes.
There's actually a structure where you go in and check in and maybe pay a fee or something. But
Yes.
Your museum is actually not a traditional museum yet. Tell me about it.
Not yet. We have a developmental process, and we're still really quite early on. We're only a couple of years in. We'll be launching our first exhibitions quite soon, in fact. And we've started running public programs, discussions, and panels. We're launching a panel series. But eventually, we'll work our way through a laboratory interim space and then to a permanent museum space. The idea is this. Museums are incredibly popular, so counterintuitively for most people, attendance in the US of museums is equal to national parks attendance, plus all major league sporting events attendance, plus all the major amusement and theme parks per year. It's 850 million visits a year. People love museums, they trust museums, and people actually have, in polling data, said they want to learn more about climate from museums.
And they come to New York.
And they come to New York to go to museums. So the idea of a climate museum as a way to focus public attention and build civic dialogue just seemed so self-evident intuitively, and turns out the research backs that up. I didn't know it at the time. It was an intuition that felt like it was a nickel dropped into a piggy bank. It arrived to me fully formed.
You know, I have to ask you though, what's the museum's message? How should people feel inspired when they walk through this eventual space? This is the topic du jour, right? But how do you keep people engaged? Is
Yes.
that the point?
I think there are three main messages. The first is a bit of a sounding of the alarm. So this is something we need to focus on as a society. The second is there are solutions afoot, and we can all participate in them. And the third thing is it depends on what we do. We've got two counterposed realities: increasing climate disasters, increasing climate solutions. The needle can tip either way, and it depends on what we do together. Those are the three themes of the museum.
So it's true. Of late, we've seen a lot of disasters, and it's bringing up this debate again between believers and non-believers, we'll
Yes.
call them. Are things going to get worse before they get better? Where are we now?
Where we are is, well, first, the science is very clear on some things and not at all clear on others. One thing that's very clear is that storms have gotten more intense, and the wildfire season has grown longer and more intense as well. And we now, as of quite recently, have scientists working in a global network called the World Weather Attribution Project. And when an extreme weather event occurs, they assess it for analysis. And for example, the extreme heat wave that hit Europe this summer was made 10 times more likely by climate change. Right now, they're doing an analysis of Harvey. And sometimes the answer is no, this wasn't affected by climate change at all. But increasingly often, the answer is yes, this was so strongly affected in likelihood by climate change that we can use the word caused.
Caused?
Yes.
Really?
Yes. I mean, if something is 200 times more likely to happen because of climate change, then it becomes a little bit of hair splitting to avoid using the word cause. It's affecting everything from the tick season in the northeastern United States to the migration of Syrian war refugees. Climate change is affecting dramatic swaths of the human experience. And we need to come together as a world and as a national community to understand that better and to act on it.
You know, it's interesting that you bring that up because the climate covers a broad spectrum,
Yes.
right? So break it down for us through health and social impact. How can that be more tangible for someone who just sees this as a broad topic?
The tangibility is one of the key reasons for having a museum. Actually, museums offer physical learning, emotional learning, and learning together, social learning. And in that way, place and having a physical building for exhibitions is particularly important because we can show people through all five senses what's going on in the climate.
So you're saying all five senses.
Well, that's actually
the most important is probably what they can see. Right?
Sight being the most important,
Right.
Absolutely, and touch as well. And there are museums experimenting actually with smell and taste. I don't know that that'll be so relevant for the Climate Museum, but multi-sensory learning and multidisciplinary learning are much stickier, they're much more attractive to people, and it's one of the strengths of museums. So there again, and if I can
Please
go back on a question that you asked, I think climate is affecting so many different aspects of the human experience, and we can offer exhibitions on climate and food production, climate and human migration, climate and national security. There's a whole range of topics that are being dramatically affected already by climate change, which will continue into the future even if we make aggressive efforts.
So for instance, you're saying climate and food production,
Yes.
for example. So we're talking about a place that, I'm just giving this as an example, the state of Florida that produces a lot of oranges, and then suddenly
Yes.
they're in trouble.
Exactly. The peach crop in Georgia was dramatically affected by climate change this year. And I just read a story about the oldest apple orchard in Wisconsin buying insurance, crop insurance for the first time this year because 75% of their crop was wiped out. There were early spring blossoms and then a spring freeze. We have weather disruptions affecting crop production all over. And it will be hardest across the southern states where climate denialists are most concentrated in a kind of cruel and terrible irony.
You know, you're talking about places where it affects these populations. For people who aren't read in or who aren't aware, but then they're suddenly seeing their crops in trouble. I mean, this is their bread and butter,
Yes.
So to speak. How do you engage that population in believing in and wanting to do something to reverse these effects?
It's incredibly important to try to engage every sector of the population. And with that said, our theory of change is that it's important to focus on the big middle in American culture. Most people understand that climate change is happening and they think it might be or probably is caused by humans. And some of them are unsure whether we can do something about it, and some of them feel we can. The people in the middle are the people who can change everything for all of us, including those who have been convinced by a fossil fuel funded campaign, among other things, that climate change is not a real phenomenon. So by focusing on the people who can change their minds and be brought into civic action on climate, we can change the odds for everyone.
You were a lawyer focusing
Yeah.
on civil rights. Do you see, is there any overlap between what you're doing now and what you did as an attorney?
Yes, absolutely. I think that climate change is the equality and the civil rights issue of the 21st century. I think that both domestically and internationally, it's along the axis of climate change that we will either see intensifying inequalities or a coming together and an overcoming of tribalism so that we live in a more just and integrated society. Climate change gives us, as is so often the case, that it has become a worn cliche. Climate change is both a massive challenge and a massive opportunity for us to build a better and more equal society that's more open and where we're more in dialogue with each other. And that's in part true because if you look at it right now, the nations, just looking at it internationally, that contribute most to climate change are the places that suffer least, even though we've just suffered enormous hits here in the United States in the last few months, just overwhelming hits. Elsewhere in the world, it's been far worse. And in general, those places that are most vulnerable to climate change are the places that have least contributed to it. Even domestically, though, and that's more intuitive for a lot of people, that internationally it would work that way. We've put much more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, but we have the resources here in the United States to be more protected against climate change, though not protected enough, than many other nations. But even domestically within the United States, it's communities of color and poor communities that, to a radically disproportionate extent, are hit by climate disasters, don't have resiliency measures in place to recover from them.
And why is that? Is it where they're built?
It's absolutely.
Because I don't know that people go out of their way to make a certain group suffer on purpose, right?
The main problem that we have to deal with isn't conscious acts of bigotry in terms of environmental injustice and the way that racism can express itself through differential impacts of climate change. It's how we distribute risk in the society in general. So there are often, for example, in New York City, if you think about Superstorm Sandy, which came up a moment ago, there are many poor communities, working class communities, and communities of color built in industrial,
low-lying
areas that are coastal. And the flooding there not only pose risks of toxicity because of facilities that are there, but those are already communities that are overburdened with polluting facilities that have created health risks that outscale those imposed on other communities in the first place. So the military talks about climate change as a risk multiplier or a threat multiplier. That's very true. It's also an inequality multiplier. So it's not causing the inequality. The hurricane doesn't decide to hit Puerto Rico. But Puerto Rico, because of years of policies that express institutional underlying inequalities and racism, is already in poor shape, doesn't have the resiliency. Yes.
You mentioned the Syrian refugees.
Yes.
And so refugees in general.
Yes.
As a reason, or let's call them climate refugees, right?
Yes.
Is that a term? And can you explain a little bit who they are and how they're affected?
Absolutely. So in the world of climate advocacy, climate refugees is indeed a term. In the world of the law, interestingly and importantly, it's not yet a term. So that's going to be one of the big challenges for the next decades, is getting UN and international law recognition, and of course American law recognition of the status of climate refugeeism, because there is no question scientifically that that is going to be increasingly a phenomenon that we see. If you take the example of Syria, clearly the refugee crisis wasn't caused by climate change.
No.
But climate change almost certainly intensified and lengthened the drought that itself was one of the main drivers of the Syrian refugee crisis. So similarly, just as the military talks about climate as being a threat multiplier in other situations, there too it's a threat multiplier, because a refugee crisis causes conflict and is itself destabilizing of the international situation. So there's a definite contribution there, and the UN Commissioner for Refugees estimates conservatively that there will be 250 million climate migrants, is the term the UN currently uses, over the next 30 to 35 years. 250 million
Incredible.
people. And it could be much more than that.
You know, we don't have to go that far back. I mean, in 2005, after Katrina, there was a
Yes.
migration of people from New Orleans to Houston. And then now, recently, when Hurricane Harvey hit that area, these same people were going through it for a second time. So it seems to be moving all along the way.
It's a perfect example. And a couple of years ago, I believe it was in 2015, the first community was officially moved as a climate migration question by the US government, which funded the full-scale displacement of a town in Louisiana.
Because of this.
Yes, because of this. And that was starting to happen in Alaska as well. There are villages that have to move inland. They simply can't keep the sea out anymore.
Is that something that we hear about? Because I don't think we do.
No.
It's very much under the radar. I mean, how do you move an entire community
Yes.
without addressing?
You're so right. There's not enough on this subject or so many other subjects relating to climate change. 10,000 years ago, as human beings, as modern humans, we would have picked up our tents and moved them inland. We now have massive infrastructure on the coast. And even if you're a small Alaskan village, your entire sense of local culture and place is located, even if you don't have huge expensive buildings like we do here in New York City, your whole sense of place is rooted physically in a terrain that is under threat and that is changing. And imagine being the US Navy with all of that billions of dollars of infrastructure at sea level.
There's a side of me that always thinks, well, who doesn't want that ocean or river view, right? People
Right.
save their money to get an apartment or a house by the water.
Right.
Bad idea?
Yeah, I think it's very important to weigh climate risks, and that's starting to be expressed in the unavailability of flood insurance in a lot of places up and down the East Coast. It was recently reported that flood insurance is becoming harder and harder to obtain in a lot of communities up and down the East Coast of the United States because, like the military insurance companies, they're not environmentalists by trade. They're not green. They're not tree huggers. They're very hard-nosed, pragmatic people.
But they see the same thing.
They see the risk.
Yeah.
They're in the business of risk assessment. So for people who are thinking about real estate, just consider that the shoreline is changing, and it will continue to change because of the inertia that's built into the climate system. So this is one of the many major ways in which climate change is affecting all of us already. The truth is that sea level rise gets a lot of attention compared to other climate issues. It doesn't get nearly enough, but it gets a lot of attention compared to issues like drought and wildfire, health impacts, heat stroke impacts, the heat island effects in cities. There's just a whole wealth of climate impacts that we're starting to see, but also, and really critically for the effort to build civic engagement, climate solutions too.
And that is my question too about civic engagement. Exactly. How do you launch something like that?
You've got to have people understanding that in coming together and acting together on the successes that have already started to take hold with the transition to a clean energy economy, that we can get there and we can restabilize the climate by working together.
So this is what I was going to ask you about restabilizing and getting this back on track. Some things are irreversible.
Yes.
But what is out there? We want to have a little bit of optimism here. It's not all hopeless, I hope.
It's not hopeless at all. There are solutions taking place at scale, to massive efforts to decarbonize the economy. Last year, solar energy was the fastest growing energy in the United States for the first time. That is extraordinary. Coal, which is exceptionally polluting, despite the efforts of the current administration, which are just unfortunately just a dishonest sop to some of the voters who elected our president, everybody, including the coal companies, is very well aware that coal is rapidly declining as an energy source. And that's very good news for absolutely everyone, assuming we take action to provide job training for the small number of coal miners still remaining in our society, because coal is super polluting. So we're already seeing this transition happening, with China and other nations now taking a very strong leading position, which is a blow to American political leadership in the world, but one from which we can recover ultimately. We're taking huge steps forward toward clean energy, and there's a lot of progress yet to come.
I want to know from you, what roadblocks have you faced along the way in doing this? Because you're going up against a behemoth here with this museum of part of a society that just does not believe anything that you're saying.
There's a huge part of the society that doesn't believe in terms of financial resources, because so much of our economy is based on the fossil fuel industry. Our whole society is really built on that energy source.
On a profit, yeah.
Yes, on a profit basis. And that is what makes solving the climate challenge so daunting. It's a truly daunting thing. Our culture is built on this. And the people who profit off of that are very deeply committed to maintaining that line. It's already falling away from them. That's the truth of it. And the people whom they have convinced through a misinformation campaign that it's all a big hoax or conspiracy are relatively few in number in the US. We have the impression that there are a lot of climate denialists in the general population in the United States, but the truth is much more nuanced, and there's actually a very big middle of people who are more or less concerned and more or less aware of the science. So we're not focused on convincing the hard denialists. They're very welcome to come to the museum once we open, but we don't think that we're the factor that's going to change their mind. We do know from prior studies of museums in other contexts that we can change the mind of people in that big middle, and that we can also take the 18% of Americans who are very alarmed about the climate and give them a sense of collective ability to act on it. And if we do those two things, we will have a different level of civic engagement, we'll have a different level of policy, and we'll be making huge climate progress.
Do you ever feel alone in this?
You know, it's funny. There are definitely moments where I think you feel alone taking on a big challenge like this. And I think being the leader of an organization, there are roundtables that directors of organizations in the nonprofit sector, and I assume also in the for-profit corporate world, set up because it's a lonely thing, organically, in one way. In another way, I have to say we've been met with so much joy and welcome by so many different sectors. So much enthusiasm, exactly, that you feel at the same time less alone than you ever have. That's been my experience of it. An incredible, small still, but incredible team of colleagues, an unbelievable network of advisors. These people with a range of talents and skills that you wouldn't believe, aligning themselves with us, pulling for us, really working to make this happen. And then we've had experiences of public interaction that have been so inspiring, where I'll give just one example. Please. If I can.
Yeah.
This August, we participated in a New York City street fair called Summer Streets. So this wasn't Earth Day, it wasn't an environmental crowd, it was regular New Yorkers and regular tourists. And we took snapshots of people and asked them where a climate museum should be, why do they feel we need one, and a couple of other questions. We had people lined up around the corner to talk to us about their feelings about the Climate Museum and why they wanted to have one. These were regular people.
And who felt the need to have one?
Yes, yes. People are hungry to learn about climate. They're hungry to learn about it in a museum context because people trust museums. And then two, in terms of breaking the climate silence, museums confer and express social priority. It's one of the things they do. So if you think about as two examples, the 9/11 Museum
Yes.
and the new Smithsonian Museum of African American History and Culture. In both cases, obviously very, very different museums, but they both are expressing that our society views the question of 9/11 and the role of Black history and culture in the United States as centrally important to who we are as a people. That's where we need to take climate. And the mere fact of creating a museum about it, leave aside the programming and the collective understanding and the connections that develop within the museum if you do it well, the mere fact of creating a museum helps to do that.
I guess I have to ask you one final question, which is, where will this physical place eventually be? Are we going to break some news here?
Well, in a couple of years, we'll be breaking that news. But my question to you is, where do you think it should be?
Good question. I think it should be somewhere on an elevation.
Yes.
Let's start with that.
That seems fair, though. There are plenty of architects who'd like to see the challenge of building it on the water. That's what they all say, except for the ones who say, let's put it on a boat, which is a fascinating idea.
Yeah.
A barge could be very sustainable. It communicates a lot. It's a resonant idea. What I will say about where it has to be is that it has to be transit accessible and tourist friendly.
Of course.
To serve our mission of being a hub for climate solutions and engagement.
Well, Miranda Massey, thank you so much. This was a fascinating conversation.
This was wonderful. I really appreciate it.
And we look forward to continuing again when the museum opens.
We're excited to keep you updated.
For more on this program and other Carnegie Ethics Studio productions, visit carnegiecouncil.org. There you can find video highlights, transcripts, audio recordings, and other multimedia resources on global ethics. This program is made possible by the Carnegie Ethics Studio and viewers like you.